Welcome back to the iNet Solution MemberProtect tutorials. Before diving into any of the tutorials specifically, I thought it would be a good idea to walk through a little bit of the design of the tutorials themselves so that you can better understand how the individual tutorials work. You could also take some of what you see here and move forward with it in some of your own solutions, whether web or desktop based, etc. The first thing I want to talk about is the base page. In many of our projects, we create base page objects, which is meant to inherit from a typical ASP.NET page object and then expand upon that and then use for any other pages that we create. It's basically, taking complete control of the system through use of inheritance. Nothing here is terribly sophisticated, but I still think it's worth going through so that people who are unfamiliar with MemberProtect can better understand how these tutorials work. The first things I did here is I created a MemberProtect variable that we don't assign anything to yet, as well as the data access data context. These tutorials use link to SQL via something that I've called the data access, which allows us to get into the database as quickly as possible. Upon initialization of any of the pages that inherit from this base class, the onInit is called as part of ASP.NET page lifecycle. And when that is first called, we create a MemberProtect settings object. When you create a MemberProtect object, you have to set up some of the settings that you want it to be created with initially, and that's what this is all about. This is fairly simple, though. Basically, all we're doing here is we're creating a settings object with just two parameters. The first being a connection string to get to the database with, which is using the configuration manager of .NET to get at the web.config that contains the connection string. This is actually the same connection string that is used via the link to SQL classes as well. The second parameter is the session ID of the ASP.NET instance. Just to bring that home a little closer, if we open the web.config for this project, if you see down here in connection strings, we've got one called MemberProtect, the only one, and this is the connection string to get to that database, which is called MemberProtect tutorials. That's what's being accessed right here in the base page, as well as link to SQL file, which is this data access. Then the MemberProtect object is actually instantiated using those settings, and from that point forward, this instance of the base page now has access to a MemberProtect object. You'll notice, however, that I marked it as both of these as private. This is common practice here at iNet Solution. And then the base class is onInit, which is the ASP.NET's page onInit is then called to do its processing. Finally, when the onload event occurs, we kind of override and jump in and get access to this div message, which is, you'll see that if there's successful messages or error messages or just plain old messages, we've kind of got three different versions of the message. We can output those to the master page via grabbing a hold of this div element in HTML, and I can show you that by pulling up the master page. As most people know, for ASP.NET, master pages are a nice way to have a nice similar look and feel to the site, but they don't do such a great job at getting logical code access within the individual pages, and that's why I usually create a base page. Anyway, when we move down in here, getting past all the CSS stuff that we've embedded, you'll see that right here, this div that's running at the server called div message is exactly what that code was referencing right here. And then we store that locally just long enough so that we can pull up messages that are in session, so that way we can display whether it was a successful message or an error message, etc., as the user's navigating and using the tutorial site. So that's what all this code is talking about essentially. As we move further down, we've got the unload event that occurs again as part of the normal ASP.NET page lifecycle. And the important part to remember here is that MemberProtect needs to be disposed. It has database handlers, etc., that if we leave them open are going to cause problems if we keep opening and closing these things. Remember, from the ASP.NET page lifecycle, pages are created and destroyed very, very quickly on the server, many times in a few minutes, especially on very high volume sites. So if we had a lot of MemberProtect objects being instantiated and not being disposed, we running into the issue of memory leaks, etc., and then application performance just becomes very, very bad. So you always want to remember to dispose of your MemberProtect object every time the page is finished. Just like anything else when you're opening a file or accessing database information, etc. Then I've got some public methods that I've exposed on this base class that are going to be available to every page that we create, which is going to be these 10 tutorial pages, which all inherit from this guy. And I've got a lot of different methods to support the different messages that I have to throw around. I won't get into all of that, but suffice it to say that these different things are used for different purposes. So we've got show message that's still passing the query string, etc. And that just goes along with the general design of this site. Again, the site design is all up to you, the developer. This is just explaining how the tutorials work here. And then down here at the very bottom, I've got a new area in the code called public properties. And these are fairly important because the MemberProtect object that we created up here at the top, which was a private variable, needs access. We need access to that through our children pages that inherit from the base page. And that's all this does. It exposes that object through a public property. And it also exposes the data access, which is, again, is the link to SQL classes to the individual pages if I need access to, say, a SQL function or a stored procedure or whatever, even tables, etc. It's just a nice convenience thing that I've created for myself as the developer. So that's the base page, and that's every page. You have to remember all the tutorials inherit from this. So everything that's available here publicly is available to the tutorials, and you'll see that actually helps keep the code bloat down with a lot of the validation and showing messages, etc. The master page code behind has very little going on. I mean, in a real live production website, you're probably going to have a lot more things going on in here. But again, this is very simplistic, and so all of your main logic is included in the base page. There's also this accompanying message class that is very, very, very simple. And this is how we get the messages, whether they're positive, neutral, or negative, in tone to the user. So if something goes wrong, we use a negative tone. And if something is successful, obviously we want to show that. And we just do that very simply through CSS using a green or red or normal black text to illustrate that something worked to the user, etc. So that between the base page and the message, those are the main core pieces of functionality that are driving these tutorial pages as well. So that's the general makeup of the tutorials that you'll find in this project. And looking through the project, I think that's probably about it. Obviously, we've got some images to pretty up the demonstration here, and some CSS files as well that aren't as important to talking about MemberProtect. We can take a look at the link to SQL classes that I created. This is very, very simple as well. And it's very simple. All I've done is created an org type. I just dragged this in from the data repository. There's a lot more tables in MemberProtect. I've just done this for sample purposes, and we could drag in SQL functions and stored procedures, etc. And then those would then obviously be available to the data access object and then be able to be used in those different pages. Again, this is just one of the many ways that you might want to create a solution around MemberProtect. MemberProtect was designed to be very, very flexible, so this is by no means the only way or the best way. That really is up to the solution that you're trying to create. All right, with that, we'll move on to the next and first tutorial.